The date is December 4th, 1972. Kay Stayner stops at a pharmacy to pick up a prescription on her way to get her 7-year-old son, Steven, from school. The stop takes longer than she expects, and when she arrives at the school, Steven is gone. She follows the route he usually takes to walk home, but doesn't see him anywhere. Steven would sometimes get distracted on his way home, so at first, Kay doesn't panic, but after a couple of hours, she starts to get worried. Around the same time, Steven's father, Delbert, also becomes concerned. The Stayner family lives in Merced, California, a quiet farming town about 70 miles from Yosemite National Park. Kay and Delbert have 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys. Steven is the 3rd child, right in the middle. He is quiet, sensitive, and enjoys spending time on his dad's tractor at their almond ranch. Even though he mostly keeps to himself, Steven had recently gotten into a little trouble at home for writing his name on the garage door. Delbert had planned to talk to him about it when he got home, but Steven never walks through the door. Kay and Delbert know their son wouldn't run away. They file a missing person report. Not long after, flyers go up all over Merced and the nearby towns. So, what happened? What had happened was that Steven was walking home along Highway 140. He was just a few blocks from his house when a man named Edward Irving Murphy approached him. Murphy said he was a church minister. He was handing out religious flyers and asking for donations. Steven thought his mom would probably want to give something to their church, so the minister asked Steven if he would take him to his house to speak to his mother. Steven agreed. Then a white Buick pulled up with another man inside named Kenneth Parnell. In a televised ABC interview, Steven said he had declined the ride several times, but after being pressured by the 2 men, he gave in and climbed into the car.
And he asked me if I wanted to, me or my mother wanted to donate something to a church. And I had told him that my mother would probably want to. And so he offered me a ride home. I had refused the first time, telling him that my house is just a few blocks away. And he had asked me several more times, and after a while I had taken a ride. And then
Steven thought they were taking him home, but they kept driving past the usual turns. Eventually they stopped, and Parnell got out of the car to use a payphone. When he returned, he told Steven that he had spoken to his parents and that they had given permission for him to stay the night with the men. Parnell then took Steven to his small cabin in Cathy's Valley. It was just 25 miles from Steven's home and only a few hundred feet from his maternal grandfather's house. That first night, Steven was raped. During that first week, Steven asked many times to go back to his family, but Parnell told him that he had contacted his mom and dad, and they said they couldn't afford to raise so many children, and that they didn't want Steven anymore. Days later, he told Steven that the courts had granted him legal custody. Parnell said Steven was no longer Steven Stayner. His new name was Dennis Gregory Parnell, and he was to call Parnell Dad. 2 weeks into his abduction, Parnell began to essay the 7-year-old boy regularly. The Merced Police Department takes the lead on the investigation. A large-scale search is launched, but there is no evidence to follow. No witnesses come forward. No tracks are found, and no solid leads emerge. Officers go door to door. Roadblocks are set up, and dozens of people are interviewed, but nothing comes of it. It is as if Steven has vanished into thin air. Over the following 7.5 years, Steven was enrolled in several schools in Mendocino County and Santa Rosa as Dennis, using his real date of birth. The first school he attended, Kawana Elementary in Santa Rosa, failed to request his records, missing a chance to identify Dennis as the boy that, at the time, all of California was looking for. Around 1975, Kenneth Parnell began a relationship with a woman named Barbara Mathis. The relationship lasted 18 months, and she eventually moved in with Parnell and Steven. At age 9, Steven was essayed on 9 occasions by Parnell and Mathis together. Mathis claimed to have not known that Steven had been kidnapped, but during their time together, claiming it was on Parnell's direction, she attempted to lure another young boy into a vehicle. This attempt was unsuccessful. By the time he reached 6th grade, Steven had been beaten, regularly smoked marijuana, gotten drunk on whiskey, came and went from home as he pleased, and had been thoroughly swayed into believing his family in Merced didn't want him. His attendance at school was sporadic, but he enjoyed being part of the football team. It was said that Steven had a great personality and desired to make friends. He was described as spunky by Lori Duke, a high school girlfriend. Friends of Steven's said he wouldn't invite them into his home, but they would sometimes come by and stay outside. At one point, he got drunk and complained that he wanted to go back to his family. When friends suggested he go home to his dad, he said, "No, my real family." And they just didn't understand what he meant. Parnell often had jobs that required him to leave Steven home alone for long periods. As an adult, Steven said he knew he could have used those long absences to run away, but he didn't know how to seek help. Later, it was discovered that Steven's family had sent missing person flyers to some of the schools he attended, but no one recognized him. When Parnell first took Steven, he had dyed his hair, and as Steven grew older, he simply didn't look the same. During the years he lived as Dennis Parnell, Steven occasionally questioned what he had been told about his parents not wanting him. He sometimes looked through newspaper articles and TV reports to see if his family was searching for him. When he found nothing, it reinforced the lie Parnell had told him that he wasn't wanted. Despite the horrors Parnell inflicted during Steven's captivity, one small mercy was a Manchester Terrier puppy named Queenie, given to Steven by Parnell's mother. According to all accounts, she was unaware Steven existed during those years. By 1979, 14-year-old Steven was a freshman at Mendocino High School. He was growing up and becoming harder for Parnell to control. As he went through puberty, with broadening shoulders and a deepening voice, Parnell's attraction to him faded. Steven was no longer the little boy he once was, so Parnell wanted another child he could control. Parnell tried several times to use Steven to help kidnap other children, but all attempts failed. Parnell thought Steven lacked the skills needed as an accomplice, but Steven later said he purposely sabotaged these attempts. On February 13, 1980, Parnell enlisted the help of 14-year-old Sean Poorman, an acquaintance of Steven's from high school. Poorman was promised marijuana and cash in exchange for helping scout a male child for Parnell to kidnap. That day, Parnell drove to Ukiah, California, about an hour away. Poorman spotted a small boy playing outside his home, approached him, and grabbed him. Although the boy struggled, Poorman dragged him to a waiting car where Parnell was inside. The boy was 5-year-old Timmy White. Back home, Parnell dyed Timmy's blonde hair dark brown and told him his new name was Tommy. The next day, Valentine's Day, Steven came home and found Parnell waiting to introduce him to his new, younger brother. Timmy was crying and asking to go home. Parnell began grooming Timmy, just as he had Steven, telling him his parents didn't want him anymore and reminding him of his own experience of feeling alone and unprotected. Steven later said, "I couldn't see Timmy suffer. I just didn't think it was right for him to have to go through the same thing that I did. He really didn't have to. There was someone there who could stop it." Confiding in his girlfriend, Lori Duke, Steven told her everything that had happened. In a later interview, she recalled, "He literally said, I was not going to let that child go through what I had already been through. And if I didn't take care of it now, it would just get worse." In March 1980, Parnell was working as a night clerk at the Palace Hotel in Ukiah and was planning to begin training and working in security for the hotel. He had also taken a second job as a caretaker on a ranch where he was provided free housing, a single shack in a remote and isolated area of Fort Bragg. Timmy had been with them for 16 days when, on March 1st, 14-year-old Steven finally saw his chance to escape while Parnell was away at work. In a 1984 interview with Newsweek, Steven said, "It was my do-or-die chance, and I also would be coming home for doing something positive." Parnell left for work that evening. After he was gone, Steven and Timmy walked hand in hand out of the shack and hitchhiked 40 miles to Ukiah. Steven wanted to return Timmy to his home, but it was dark and the young boy couldn't remember where he lived. Realizing they wouldn't find Timmy's house, Steven took him to the Ukiah police station. At first, Steven hadn't intended to enter the station with Timmy. He planned to send Timmy in alone and run away, still partially convinced that his own family back in Merced didn't want him. But the frightened little boy convinced Steven to walk up to the authorities with him. Sitting down to write a statement, Steven explained the kidnapping of both himself and Timmy. He told the police, "I know my first name is Steven." This moment became one of the most remarkable of the story, inspiring the title for an eventual book and made-for-TV movie. He added, "I think my last name is Stayner." At this point, Steven did not disclose the sexual abuse he had suffered at the hands of his captor. By sunrise on March 2nd, Parnell had been arrested on suspicion of abducting both boys. At 1 a.m. before Parnell's arrest, Steven was reunited with his parents, surrounded by hundreds of neighbors, media, and law enforcement. Dell approached Steven with a big hug, and Kay was close behind. Media coverage captured the emotional moment, with Steven holding his Manchester Terrier, Queenie, as his parents embraced him. He became a national hero, appearing on Good Morning America within days of coming home. He told the host that it felt great to be back with his family, although he didn't recognize his siblings, much after being gone for 7.5 long years. While the media portrayed the family reunion as heartwarming, the reality was far from that. While Steven initially kept the sexual abuse private in his statement, police discovered Kenneth Parnell's 1951 sodomy conviction during a background check. Steven continued to deny any abuse until officers found lewd photos of a young, naked Steven in Parnell's possession. When confronted, the truth came out, and soon the media was informed. Within days of Steven's return, his parents enrolled him in high school. As news of the abuse spread, other students began bullying him, asking why he hadn't run away sooner, if he enjoyed it, or if he was gay. The teasing and harassment eventually led Steven to drop out of school and sink into a deep depression. Adjusting to life at home was equally challenging. No longer the 7-year-old boy who had disappeared, the nearly 6-foot teenager barely resembled the child he once was. He went from having no rules and no siblings to living with 4 siblings, sharing a room with an older brother who didn't recognize him and whom he didn't recognize either. Being expected to respect authority and give up smoking, drinking, drugs, and late nights was difficult. Reflecting on the changes, Steven said, "I returned almost a grown man, and yet my parents saw me first as their 7-year-old boy. After they stopped trying to teach me the basics all over again, things got better. But why doesn't my dad hug me anymore? I guess 7 years changed him too. Everything has changed. Sometimes I blame myself. Sometimes I wonder if I should have come home. Would I have been better off if I hadn't?" His sister Corey said he got on with his life, but he was pretty messed up and never got any counseling. My dad said he didn't need any. Because of this, Steven refused to disclose all the details of the sexual abuse he endured from Parnell. Eventually, he was kicked out of the family home, and his relationship with his father remained damaged for the rest of his life. A close relative later reflected that Steven was lucky to survive his teens, mentioning there were times he spoke of suicide. In June 1981, Parnell was convicted of the abduction of Timmy White and sentenced to 7 years. In December 1981, almost 9 years to the day after Steven had been taken, Kenneth Parnell was put on trial for Steven's abduction. Steven testified against his captor, and the entire trial, including his testimony, was televised. Although Parnell had regularly sexually abused Steven, molestation charges were dropped because the court ruled the statute of limitations had expired. Parnell was sentenced to another 7 years for Steven's kidnapping, but California law at the time allowed multiple convictions to be served concurrently rather than consecutively. Because of this, Parnell only served an additional 20 months for the kidnapping and false imprisonment of Steven. He was paroled in 1985. On September 16, 1989, a particularly rainy night, Steven was leaving work at Pizza Hut. His manager suggested he drive the company truck home for safety. Steven reminded him he had a suspended license and that an accident might reflect badly on the franchise, so he declined and rode his motorcycle instead. Just 3 miles down the road, he collided with a driver coming out of a nearby migrant camp. Steven was not wearing a helmet and died within an hour from head injuries. He was only 24.